Princess Tilara stood before the massive mirror in her royal chambers, watching as her personal attendants adjusted her ceremonial robes. Her silvery skin sparkled under the light of 3 moons shining through the crystal windows of the Xanthurian palace. She let out a quiet sigh, making the bioluminescent patterns on her neck flicker with frustration. "Is something wrong, Your Highness?" asked her chief attendant, Carl. "Another diplomatic meeting," Tilara replied, her voice carrying the musical tone typical of her species. "This time with the humans. Mother insists I attend, even though they're just another primitive species that recently discovered faster-than-light travel." Carl nodded respectfully, but said nothing. Everyone knew better than to question the Queen's decisions. The great hall of the Xanthurian palace was packed with dignitaries from across the empire when Tilara arrived. Her mother, Queen Vithor, sat on the crystal throne, her royal markings glowing with a steady, commanding blue light. The Queen's 6-fingered hand gestured for Tilara to take her place on the smaller throne beside her. "Remember, daughter," Queen Vithor spoke telepathically, "show them proper courtesy, but maintain our dignity. These humans are still learning their place in the galaxy." The massive doors at the end of the hall swung open. Tilara expected to see creatures stumbling in, overwhelmed by the grandeur of Xanthurian architecture. Instead, the human delegation walked in with confidence, their backs straight and their steps measured. Leading them was a male human with features that Tilara found oddly fascinating. "Your Majesty," the human said, bowing with perfect form. "I am Ambassador James Chen of Earth. We are honored by your invitation." Tilara was surprised. Most species needed universal translators, but this human spoke perfect Xanthurian. His voice lacked the musical quality of her people, but there was something interesting about it. "Welcome, Ambassador Chen," Queen Vithor replied. "We trust your journey through the quantum gates was comfortable." "Very much so, Your Majesty. Though I must admit, we're still amazed by your engineering. Our scientists are eager to learn more about Xanthurian technology." Tilara noticed something unusual in the ambassador's expression when he mentioned science. A slight curve of his lips, a brightness in his eyes. These subtle changes fascinated her. Xanthurians typically communicated emotions through their bioluminescent patterns, but humans seemed to have countless ways of expressing themselves. The diplomatic meeting proceeded as usual, with discussions about trade routes and technology exchange. But Tilara found herself paying more attention to the human delegation's behavior than the actual talks. They showed respect without fear, interest without worship, and confidence without arrogance. It was different from what she'd been taught about primitive species. During a break in the proceedings, Ambassador Chen approached her throne, causing the royal guards to tense up. "Princess Tilara," he said, bowing again, "I couldn't help but notice your interest in our delegation. Perhaps you'd like to learn more about Earth's culture. We believe that understanding between our peoples should extend beyond just political relations." Before Tilara could respond, Queen Thor cut in telepathically. "Decline politely, daughter. Direct interaction with lesser species is beneath your station." But for the first time in her life, Tilara found herself wanting to disobey. "Thank you, Ambassador," she said out loud. "I would be interested in learning more. Perhaps we could arrange a proper cultural exchange session." The subtle change in the ambassador's expression, something she would later learn was called a smile, made her own bioluminescent patterns flutter in an unusual pattern. As she watched the human delegation leave the Great Hall, Tilara knew she had just done something that would change her life forever. What she didn't know was just how right she was. Back in her chambers that evening, she found herself doing something unprecedented, using her royal access codes to look up information about humans in the Imperial database. As she read about their history, their art, their ability to adapt and survive against all odds, she felt an unfamiliar sensation. Was this what humans called excitement? She needed to know more. And Ambassador James Chen might be the key to understanding these fascinating creatures who seemed so different, yet somehow felt so familiar. 2 weeks after the diplomatic meeting, Tilara found herself walking through the royal gardens, supposedly studying ancient Centurion plants for her royal duties. In reality, she was heading toward a hidden corner where Ambassador Chen waited. Her heart, all three of them, beat faster than usual. "You came," James said, standing up from a bench partially hidden by tall, glowing plants. He smiled, and Tilera noticed her bioluminescent patterns brightening in response. "I had to be careful," she replied. "The royal guards are always watching. I told them I needed privacy for my botanical studies." James chuckled, a sound that Tulera found strangely pleasant. "On Earth, we have stories about princesses sneaking out to meet people they're not supposed to. I never thought I'd be part of one." "Tell me about these stories," Tulera said, sitting down beside him. She kept a proper distance, as Zenthurian custom demanded, but found herself wanting to move closer. "Well, there's one called Cinderella, where a princess-to-be has to hide her identity to meet the prince she loves." James pulled out a small device from his pocket. "But first, would you like to see something from Earth?" He pressed a button, and suddenly the air between them filled with holographic images of Earth. Lara gasped as she saw oceans, mountains, cities, and forests. "It's so colorful," she whispered. "Our worlds are mostly silver and blue. But yours, that's what makes Earth special," James explained. "We have deserts and ice caps, rainforests and mountains, all on one planet. Maybe that's why humans learn to adapt so well." Their secret meetings continued over the next few weeks. Sometimes they met in the gardens, sometimes in abandoned parts of the old palace. Each time, James brought something new to share: music, art, or stories from Earth. But keeping secrets in the royal palace wasn't easy. One evening, as Tilera hurried back from a meeting, she almost ran into Carl, her chief attendant. "Your Highness," Carl said, bowing, "the Queen has been asking about your whereabouts." Tilera's patterns flickered with worry. "I was studying, as usual." Carol's expression remained neutral, but her own patterns showed concern. "Princess, if I may be careful, the royal spymaster has been asking questions about your new study habits." That night, Tilera couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about James, about the strange new feelings she was experiencing. Centurions weren't supposed to feel such strong emotions. They were supposed to be logical, controlled, superior to other species. So why did she feel more alive when talking to this human than she ever had before? The next day, Queen V4 summoned Tulara to her private chambers. "Daughter," the Queen said, her patterns glowing with authority, "the High Council is concerned about your recent behavior. You've been missing important ceremonies, and there are rumors." "Mother, I've been focused on my studies," Tilera tried to explain. "See that it stays that way." The Queen's patterns flashed a warning. "Remember, you are the future of our empire. We cannot show weakness, especially not with these newer species watching us." But that evening, Tilera still went to meet James. This time, he had brought something called chocolate. "It's a special treat from Earth," he explained, unwrapping a small package. "Just don't tell anyone I smuggled it through customs." Tilera took a tiny bite, and her patterns exploded with light. The taste was unlike anything in the Empire's 1,000 worlds. "This is amazing. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we're not supposed to have," James said softly. As they sat there, sharing Earth chocolate and stories under the 3 moons, Tilera realized she was in dangerous territory. But for the first time in her life, danger felt exciting rather than frightening. What she didn't know was that high above them, hidden in the palace towers, the royal spymaster's cameras were recording everything. The Queen would soon see exactly what her daughter had been studying. A month had passed since Tilera first tasted chocolate, and her secret meetings with James had become more frequent. Today, they sat in their usual hidden spot in the garden, but something felt different. Tilera's patterns kept shifting between purple and gold, colors that had never appeared in her bioluminescence before. "Are you feeling all right?" James asked, noticing her unusual colors. I've never seen your patterns do that before. Tilara touched her neck self-consciously. I'm not sure. Lately, I've been experiencing sensations that aren't normal for my species. When I think about our meetings, my patterns change on their own. James moved closer, his eyes showing concern. What kind of sensations? My heart's beat faster. I can't focus during royal duties. I keep thinking about our talks, about Earth, about... She paused, her patterns flashing brightly. About you. James's expression softened. On Earth, we have a name for those feelings. What do you call it? Love. The word hung in the air between them. Tilara had read about human love in the Imperial database, but Xanthurians had always dismissed it as a primitive emotion. That's impossible, she whispered. My species doesn't feel love. We choose mates based on genetic compatibility and social status. Our marriages are arranged by the Council of Elders. James shook his head. Maybe you've always been capable of love, but your society taught you to ignore it. Humans once thought showing emotions was a weakness too. Then we realized it was our greatest strength. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flower, a real one from Earth. This is a rose. On our world, it's a symbol of love. Tilara took the flower carefully in her six-fingered hand. It was red, a color rarely seen on her world, and gave off a sweet scent that made her patterns sparkle. How do humans know? She asked. How do you know when it's love? Sometimes your heart tells you, James said. Other times, you just want to do this. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. But Tilara didn't move. When his lips touched hers, her entire body lit up with colors she didn't know she could make. The garden around them was bathed in rainbow light. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but it changed everything. When they pulled apart, Tilara touched her lips in wonder. That was, she couldn't find words in any of the 12 languages she knew. I know, James said softly. I felt it too, ever since we first met. I just wasn't sure if you could feel the same way. Suddenly, they heard footsteps on the garden path. Tilara quickly moved away from James, her patterns now showing alarm. Princess. Carl's voice called out. Are you here? The Queen requires your presence immediately. Tilara stood up, her mind racing. I have to go. But James, she looked at him, her patterns showing a mix of fear and something else, something new and wonderful and terrifying all at once. I know, he said again, understanding in his eyes. Go, we'll find a way. As Tilara hurried back to the palace, clutching the earth rose, she knew there was no turning back. She had done more than just kiss a human. She had proven that everything her people believed about themselves might be wrong. That night, alone in her chambers, she placed the rose in a crystal vase and watched as her patterns reflected off its petals. Every time she looked at it, her colors shifted to that new, impossible combination of purple and gold. Love, such a simple word for such a powerful force. As she fell asleep, Tilara wondered what other emotions her people had denied themselves over the centuries. And more importantly, what would happen when everyone discovered that their princess had fallen in love with a human. What she didn't know was that she would find out much sooner than she expected. Queen Vithor sat on her private throne, watching the holographic recording for the third time. Her patterns flashed dark red, a color of rage rarely seen in Xanthurian royalty. The recording showed everything. Her daughter kissing the human ambassador, Tilara's patterns lighting up with impossible colors, the exchange of the earth flower. How long has this been happening? She asked the royal spymaster, who stood nervously before her. At least 2 months, Your Majesty, replied the spymaster, her own patterns dim with worry. They've been meeting in secret all this time. The Queen was about to respond when her personal AI assistant interrupted. Your Majesty, urgent medical alert regarding Princess Tilara. What is it? The Queen demanded. The princess's morning health scan shows unusual readings. There appears to be cellular activity consistent with pregnancy. The Queen's patterns went completely dark, something that hadn't happened in over a century of rule. Impossible. Show me the data. Holographic medical charts filled the air around her. As a former scientist herself, the Queen understood exactly what she was seeing. Her daughter wasn't just carrying a child, she was carrying a hybrid. A human Xanthurian child. Something that should have been biologically impossible. "Bring me the palace's chief medical officer," she commanded, "and keep this information absolutely secret." But it was already too late for secrecy. In the medical wing of the palace, Tilara was discovering the news herself. She had gone for her routine health scan, but this time the medical eye's response was different. "Your Highness," the AI said, "your scan indicates significant changes in your cellular structure. You appear to be approximately 1 week pregnant." Tilara's patterns flashed with shock. "That's not possible. I haven't undergone any genetic matching ceremony. And the only person I've been close to is..." Her patterns suddenly dimmed as she realized the implications. The medical officer, Dr. Klar, rushed in. "Princess, please remain calm. We need to run more tests to understand what's happening." But Tilara wasn't listening. Her mind was racing, trying to process the impossible reality. She needed to find James. She needed to tell him. Before she could leave, Queen Vithor swept into the medical wing, her patterns still dark with anger. The few staff present quickly bowed and left the room. "Do you understand what you've done?" The Queen's voice was cold. "You haven't just broken royal protocol. You've created something that could destroy everything our empire stands for." "Mother, Tilara started, but the Queen cut her off. "We are supposed to be perfect, superior. Our genetics are carefully controlled, planned for maximum advancement of our species. And you..." Her patterns flashed dangerously. "You mated with a human." "I love him," Tilara said quietly, her patterns showing a steady gold despite her fear. "Love." The Queen laughed bitterly. "That primitive emotion humans talk about. We are beyond such things." "Are we?" Tilara challenged, one hand moving protectively to her stomach. "Then why can I feel it? Why do my patterns show colors our species has never seen before?" Before the Queen could respond, Dr. Klar cleared her throat nervously. "Your Majesty, you need to see this." She projected new medical data into the air. "The fetus. It's showing signs of both species' strengths. Human adaptability combined with Xanthurian psychic abilities. This could be..." "An abomination," the Queen finished. "Or the next step in evolution," Tilara said firmly. The Queen stared at her daughter for a long moment. Then she pressed a button on her royal communicator. "Guard Captain, find Ambassador Chen. Place him under arrest for crimes against the Empire." "Mother, no." Tilara's patterns flashed with panic. "Until we decide what to do about this situation, you will be confined to your chambers," the Queen commanded. "And if you try to contact the human..." She left the threat unfinished. As royal guards led Tilara away, she sent out a desperate telepathic message, hoping James would somehow hear it. "Run!" News spread through the Xanthurian palace like wildfire. Despite the Queen's efforts to keep it secret, someone had leaked the medical scans showing Princess Tilara's pregnancy. Within hours, the entire High Council demanded an emergency meeting. James was in his diplomatic quarters when he received Tilara's telepathic warning. He had never heard her voice in his mind before. Their species' psychic abilities weren't supposed to work with humans. But love, it seemed, had changed the rules. "Ambassador, you need to leave now," said Lisa Wong, his human assistant, rushing into the room. "The Xanthurian guards are coming." James grabbed only what he could carry. "What about Tilara?" "There's a group that can help," Lisa said, leading him through a hidden door in the quarters. "They call themselves the Unity Movement. Xanthurians and humans who've been meeting in secret for years." Meanwhile, in the High Council chamber, chaos erupted. The massive circular room was filled with the glow of angry patterns as council members argued. "This is an outrage." shouted Council Elder Kavor, his patterns flashing bright orange. "The royal bloodline has been contaminated by human DNA. Perhaps we should study this development," suggested Council Member Marin, a younger Xanthurian. "If the princess's child shows both species' strengths—" Silence. Kavor interrupted. "You sound like one of those Unity Movement sympathizers." In her chambers, Tilara paced anxiously. The guards outside her door wouldn't let her leave or communicate with anyone. But she wasn't completely alone. Carl, her loyal attendant, had refused to abandon her. "Your Highness," Carl whispered, "there's something you should know. I'm part of the Unity Movement. We can help you and Ambassador Chen." Lara's patterns flickered with surprise. "You? But you've always been so traditional." Carol smiled. "Many of us have learned that humans have much to teach us. About emotions, about love, about living fully. We've been working in secret to bring our peoples together." Suddenly, they heard shouting from the corridors. The palace communication system crackled to life, broadcasting across the empire. "Attention all citizens. Ambassador James Chen is wanted for crimes against the empire. Any citizens harboring him will face severe punishment." In the human diplomatic compound, chaos reigned. Earth's officials were trying desperately to prevent an interstellar incident. "This is ridiculous," Earth's chief diplomat argued over the quantum communicator. "Ambassador Chen has diplomatic immunity." "Not in cases of genetic crime," the Xanthurian official replied coldly. But James was already far from the diplomatic compound. The Unity Movement had hidden him in an ancient temple in the city's forgotten underground levels. He wasn't alone. Dozens of other human Xanthurian couples lived there, having faced similar persecution. "We never thought the princess would be one of us," said Zara, a Xanthurian woman whose human husband stood beside her. "But maybe this will finally force our society to change." Back in the palace, Queen Vithor faced her own crisis. The conservative council members demanded she strip Tilara of her royal status. The progressives threatened to expose the empire's long history of suppressing emotional development. And now Earth was threatening to cut off all diplomatic relations. Tilara sat by her window, watching the three moons rise. She placed one hand on her stomach, wondering about the tiny life growing inside her, a life that was already changing everything. "Your Highness," Carl whispered urgently, "it's time. The movement has a plan to get you out." Tilara's patterns showed fear and hope mixed together. "But what about the empire?" "My duties." "Sometimes," Carl said, "creating a better future means leaving the past behind." As the moons reached their peak, Tilara made her choice. She might lose her crown, but she wouldn't lose love. Not now that she finally knew what it meant. What no one realized was that this crisis would force the Xanthurian Empire to confront not just one forbidden love, but an entire movement that would change their civilization forever. Deep in the underground temple, Dr. Kalar worked in a secret laboratory. She had risked everything by joining the Unity Movement, bringing her advanced medical equipment with her. Now she studied the latest scans of Tilara's pregnancy with growing excitement. "This is extraordinary," she said, her patterns glowing with scientific curiosity. Tilara lay on an examination table while James held her hand. "The baby is developing abilities we thought impossible." "What do you mean?" James asked, squeezing Tilara's hand gently. Dr. Kalar projected a hologram showing the developing baby. "See these neural patterns. The child has both human brain structures and Xanthurian psychic centers. It's not just surviving. It's thriving." Tilara's patterns flickered with motherly pride. "Can you tell more about our baby?" "The human DNA is allowing for rapid adaptation, while the Xanthurian genetics provide enhanced abilities. This child could potentially communicate telepathically with both species, something we thought couldn't happen. And there's more." In the royal palace, Queen Vithor sat alone in her private laboratory. Before becoming queen, she had been the empire's leading geneticist. Now she secretly studied copies of her daughter's medical data, her scientific mind unable to ignore the implications. "Computer," she commanded, "show me the hybrid DNA structure again." A hologram appeared, showing the beautiful dance of human and Xanthurian genes. The Queen's patterns shifted from dark anger to scientific wonder. The combination wasn't just viable, it was perfect. "Analysis complete," the computer announced. "Hybrid genetic structure shows 47% increased adaptability, 58% enhanced psychic potential, and 0 genetic defects." The Queen sat back, her patterns now showing confusion. Everything she believed about human inferiority was being challenged by hard scientific data. Meanwhile, in the underground temple, more discoveries were being made. Tilara had found she could now telepathically communicate with all the humans in the movement, not just James. The baby was somehow enhancing her abilities. "It's like a bridge between our species," she explained to James as they sat in their hidden room. "I can feel not just thoughts, but emotions too. It's beautiful." James smiled. "On Earth, we have a saying, love finds a way." Their peaceful moment was interrupted when Zara rushed in, her patterns showing urgency. The Queen's personal shuttle just landed outside the temple. "She's here." Everyone panicked. But before they could run, the temple's ancient doors opened. Queen Vithor walked in, accompanied by only 2 guards. Her patterns were calm. A scientist's patterns, not a queen's. "I'm not here to arrest anyone," she announced, looking at the gathered humans and Xanthurians. "I'm here because of this." She projected her own genetic analysis into the air. Dr. Killar studied the Queen's data, her patterns brightening. "You've found the same thing we have." "Yes." The Queen turned to Tilara and James. "Your child isn't just healthy. It represents the next step in evolution for both our species. The human capacity for emotion and adaptation, combined with our psychic abilities and technological advancement. It's what both our species have been moving toward," Dr. Killar finished. "Not superiority of one over the other, but a perfect blend of both." The Queen's patterns showed something new: humility. "For centuries, we thought emotion made humans weak. We engineered it out of ourselves, focused only on logic and psychic power, but we were wrong." She walked to Tilara, placing a hand gently on her daughter's stomach. "This child, and all the other hybrid children that might follow, could unite our species in ways we never imagined." "What are you saying, Mother?" Tilara asked, her patterns cautiously hopeful. "I'm saying that perhaps it's time for the Xanthurian Empire to evolve, and it will start with my grandchild." As the Queen spoke these words, Tilara felt the baby move for the first time. Her patterns exploded with joy, and for the first time in centuries, the Queen's patterns matched her daughter's, showing the long-forgotten color of love. Queen Vithor stood before her mirror in the royal chambers, preparing for the most important speech of her 1,000-year reign. Her patterns shifted between determination and nervousness, emotion she hadn't shown in centuries. "Are you sure about this, Mother?" Tilara asked, standing beside her. The princess's pregnancy was now visible, making her patterns glow with a constant warm light. "For the first time in my life, yes," the Queen replied. She touched the scientific data tablet in her hand. "These facts cannot be ignored. Our empire must change." The Great Hall was packed. Every member of the High Council was present, along with human diplomats and news broadcasters from both worlds. The Unity Movement members had been invited too, no longer forced to hide. James stood with the human delegation, watching Tilara beside her mother at the crystal throne. Even from a distance, their eyes met, and he felt a faint touch of her thoughts in his mind. Their baby's gift growing stronger each day. "Citizens of the Xanthurian Empire," Queen Vithor began, her voice broadcast across 1,000 worlds. "Today marks a historic moment in our evolution." The Queen's patterns glowed strongly as she continued. "For millennia, we have prided ourselves on logic, on superiority, on the purity of our genetics. We believed emotions made other species weak, especially humans. The conservative council members shifted uncomfortably, their patterns showing disapproval. But the queen wasn't finished. I stand before you not just as your queen, but as a scientist. The data is clear. She projected the genetic studies into the air for all to see. My daughter's child, this human-Xanthurian hybrid, shows us what we've been missing. Gasps filled the hall as the medical images appeared. The baby's DNA structure sparkled like a perfect crystal, human and Xanthurian genes dancing together in harmony. Look at these patterns. Dr. Kalar stepped forward, pointing to specific genetic markers. Enhanced adaptability from human genes, advanced psychic abilities from Xanthurian DNA. This isn't degradation, it's enhancement. The queen raised her hand for silence. But there's something even more important, something we forgot long ago. She turned to look at Tilara and James. Love. The emotion we dismissed as primitive has created something extraordinary. Elder Kavor stood up angrily. This is madness. You would throw away centuries of tradition for the future. The queen cut him off. Her patterns flared with authority. I have made my decision. From this day forward, the Xanthurian Empire will embrace change. All laws prohibiting human-Xanthurian relationships are hereby abolished. The hall erupted in chaos. Some council members shouted in protest, while others showed patterns of relief and joy. The humans in attendance broke into applause, a custom that several younger Xanthurians found themselves copying. Furthermore, the queen continued, I am establishing a new science council, led by Dr. Kalar, to study and support hybrid families. The unity movement will no longer hide in shadows, but will help guide us toward a better future. She turned to Tilara and gestured her forward. My daughter once risked everything for love. I thought she was weak. Instead, she showed us the way forward. The queen's patterns softened. The child she carries is not a threat to our empire. It is our empire's future. James couldn't help himself. He ran forward and took Tilara's hand, ignoring the shocked gasps from traditional Xanthurians. The queen watched as their patterns synchronized, Tilara's bioluminescence and James's aura that only she could now see. Let this be the first of many such unions, Queen Vithor declared. For too long, we sought perfection through isolation. Now we will find it through unity. As the queen finished speaking, Tilara felt the baby move again. This time, somehow, James felt it too. Their child already bridging the gap between their species. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Centuries of prejudice wouldn't disappear overnight. But as Tilara looked out at the mixed crowd of humans and Xanthurians, she saw something new in their patterns and expressions. Hope. Change had come to the empire, and there would be no going back. 6 months after the queen's historic announcement, the royal palace buzzed with excitement. Today was the day everyone had been waiting for. The birth of the first official human Xanthurian baby. Tilara lay in the medical chamber, her patterns glowing with a mix of pain and joy. James held her hand, feeling every contraction through their now strong telepathic bond. Queen Vithor stood nearby, her own patterns showing an emotion she was still getting used to. Grandmother's anxiety. Everything is proceeding perfectly, Dr. Kalar announced, monitoring the advanced medical displays. The baby's vital signs are strong. The news of Tilara going into labor had spread quickly. Outside the palace, thousands of humans and Xanthurians gathered together, waiting for news. Many were couples who had come out of hiding after the queen's declaration. Some held small children of their own, secret hybrids who could finally live openly. Look at all of them, James said, glancing out the window. 6 months ago, they were hiding underground. Now they're celebrating in the streets. Tilara squeezed his hand as another contraction hit. Our baby is bringing everyone together, she managed to say between breaths. The queen watched in amazement as her daughter's patterns created colors she'd never seen before. The old stories were true, she murmured. Birth patterns are sacred. One more push, Your Highness, Dr. Kalar encouraged. With a final effort, Tilara brought her child into the world. The baby's first cry was both human and Xanthurian, a musical sound that made everyone's patterns light up in response. "It's a girl," Dr. Kalar announced joyfully. The baby's skin had a subtle silvery sheen like her mother's, but with a warm human undertone like her father's. Tiny patterns already flickered across her skin, responding to her parents' touch. "She's perfect," James whispered, tears in his eyes. Another human reaction that had once seemed strange to Tilara, but now filled her with love. The queen stepped forward, her patterns glowing soft and warm. "What will you name her?" Tilara and James exchanged a look. They had chosen a name that honored both their cultures. "Hope," Tilara said, in human language, and in Xanthurian, Ulzura, the first light of dawn. "Hope Ulzura," the queen repeated, and the baby's patterns flickered in response to her grandmother's voice. A perfect name for a new beginning. Dr. Kalar ran her scans, her patterns bright with excitement. "She's showing both species' strengths already. Human emotional centers fully developed, Xanthurian psychic abilities active. And look, she can regulate her own bioluminescence." As if to prove the point, baby Hope's patterns shifted to match each person who held her, first her mother's joy, then her father's love, and finally her grandmother's pride. The queen stepped onto the palace balcony to address the waiting crowd. "Citizens of Earth and the Empire," she announced, her voice carrying across the square. "I present to you Hope Ulzura, daughter of Princess Tilara and Ambassador James Chen, the first child of our new united future." The crowd erupted in cheers. Human applause mixed with Xanthurian light displays, creating a celebration unlike anything either world had seen before. Back in the medical chamber, Tilara held her daughter, while James sat beside them. The baby had wrapped her tiny hand around her father's finger, while synchronizing her patterns with her mother's glow. "She's going to change everything," Tilara said softly. "She already has," James replied, kissing them both gently. The queen watched her family, her wonderfully, impossibly mixed family, and felt her old certainties about superiority and separation fade away. In their place was something better, the knowledge that love, in all its forms, would always find a way. Outside, the 3 moons of the Xanthurian homeworld rose into the night sky, shining down on the celebrating crowds. Humans and Xanthurians stood together, their differences no longer barriers but bridges to a brighter future. And in her mother's arms, little Hope Ulzura slept peacefully, her patterns glowing with dreams of the amazing world she would grow up in. A world where love knew no boundaries, not even between the stars.